Thank you all for those introductions. I think you raised some excellent points, all worthy of discussion. So I think to kind of open it up for all of you, I'll ask about, from your view, you all have kind of a unique perspective in what you bring. What would be, at the moment, some of the major risks, barriers, misconceptions, specifically about the implementation of these additives on farm, just to kind of set the scene, and then we can go from there. Maybe like one from each of you, just so we can move things along.
I'll go first on this one. We don't know when we can start. There are products in the market today that have suggested claims, if that's the right terminology, so we don't get anybody in trouble in the room, that we can start having an impact on this. There's insets we can start transacting to help out our processors and get this ball rolling. And there's a big concern that we don't know what the blowback is if we set a new baseline for ourselves. And so there's a lot of hesitation and concerns. And there's people in the room who could help answer that, and I hope we get there.
Brian?
Yeah, so if we're talking about misconceptions, I think, the first one is willingness. Farmers are very willing to try things. And there's plenty of you in this room that I've seen walking through the hallways that know that our farm in particular is very willing to try things. And we've tried many, many, many things. I think what's most important is that we make sure that whatever we do feed to our cows, that the end product, whether it be milk, butter, cheese, or ice cream, is still safe for the consumers. And I think that's where the research needs to be done, and we need to make sure that these products, although they may have an environmental benefit, also continue to keep our trust with consumers about how safe and healthy dairy products are.
And I would just say, I think, agree with Brian. I've been working with the dairymen here in California for 20-some years, and they're very willing to try things that work, and we know 3-NOP works. It's the most studied product. We're anxious to get it approved, and I'm confident that once we get it approved, we're going to surpass, probably all the other countries combined in terms of how many cows we're going to have that feed additive in a very short period of time, in a year's time, because we've laid the groundwork. We're ready to roll, and we just need that product approved.
I believe there is a huge interest from the dairy producers to start implementing these strategies. I don't think there is a clear long-term plan on how this is going to be sustainable for the dairy industry, and I guess that it will be a long-term limitation, but not a short-term. I think in the short term we could be ready to go.
Okay, great. So maybe this is one directed more towards Jed, and then we can kind of branch out from there. But so you're a nutritionist, so through your business and farmers directly, they're coming to events like this, hearing about these products, and we've heard many times already that the claims that are sometimes presented are not well supported, or at least, maybe in a scientific journal, we say they are, but in real practice, we have no idea what's really going on or the potential of what could go on. So how are farms evaluating these sort of making an assessment of whether or not this is ever something that they would be willing to implement on their farm? What are the kind of discussions that you're having with your customers? Or to Brian, would you be willing tomorrow to start feeding something on your farm based on kind of what we know now?
It's a great question. We have very different schools of thought. There's a couple of them out there. One is you've got a producer like Brian, which is probably on the edge of being one of the, if not the most innovative I work with. We try things, we measure them, we set goals, and we look at expected financial returns, expected animal returns, performance that is, and then quantify it. If it doesn't work, it's gone, because the cow got to decide. Then we have the other type of producer who is running a more macro approach, looking at pounds shipped out the door, feed efficiency, and if they can't quantify it on the dairy, it didn't happen. We can have years of research, years of science to support it, but if it doesn't affect the bottom line to where the accountant can call at the end of the year and say, look, what did you do? It worked. Do it again, which has only happened twice in my lifetime, then those kind of producers aren't going to chase the research because the research didn't result in an outcome for them. And so they're not hesitant to applying stuff like this. We just got to make sure that the quantifiable goals are very well documented and that they can understand how they benefit from it, if it's financial or if it's cow-based. and that we can measure those things at the dairy.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that. I think that, the ROI is extremely important, and we operate in a commodity world. So as dairy farmers, we essentially are treated all equal, right? I think my milk's really, really special, but not the person who's buying it doesn't think that it's any more special than the milk they can get from another dairy farm. So when we put in a digester in 2008, did the value of my milk increase? No, it did not. So it's the same, I think it's the same conversation when it comes to feed additives. Who is incentivizing that feed additive to be fed to the cows? And did we add value anywhere else in the supply chain? And I think, obviously, I'm very biased in this thought, but I do think the importance of financially incentivizing the farmer really needs to be done finally.
Yeah, that seems to be very clear from, it's really a through line, I would say, through most of these discussions. Did you have something to add, Michael?
The financial incentive piece is key. We've learned that with what we've done with manure methane. We're trying to stack enough incentives so the farmer's going to get paid 100% for the product he's feeding, in this case likely to be 3-NOP in the short term, and a slight incentive above that, so there's a slight revenue. If we get a product that not only reduces methane but increases productivity, that's the holy grail of Enteric, because then farmers will really see it both on the financial front end and on the financial back end with increased productivity.
And I guess that is the goal of future research, finding combination of different strategies, feed additives or management that not only can increase production and reduce emissions. That will be the great.
To come to kind of what you guys were presenting earlier, Michael in particular, so some of those programs that are going to start rolling out across the state, to kind of come back to that point of how are we going to measure any achievement or reduction? Are there elements in those programs that are going to help farmers tackle that, or?
Clearly, the intent of getting a calculator adopted by CARB is so that we can account for it on the farm. We can account for it in the carbon footprint programs we're running like Farm ES, and importantly, that CARB can account for it in the state inventory, because that ultimately is how we're going to be measured against the 40% reduction. So that calculator is not anything crazy. It was built on a voluntary protocol called Vera 2.0. Developed for us by Dr. Cabrera here at UC Davis. We submitted it to CARB in January. They've been a little preoccupied with a few other pressing matters in the short term. My hope is they're going to turn their attention to that, get it in place, and that'll help all of us better understand how this is going to get accounted for. We still need the other piece, and it's being answered by Elanco and others, how we verify utilization on the farms.
And a question maybe for you, Noelia. So you're going to run this trial, which from my understanding will help, give some answers around these questions that have been asked many times already over the last day and a half. Out of those kind of target objectives or questions that you listed, what do you think are the ones that are maybe one, the most tangible? Like what do you think you can actually get out of this? And then maybe two, the one that will have the biggest impact, for the Jeds and the Bryans in the state?
So one of the strategies that we are going to use, combining with the probiotics, it has the potential and that utilize the carbon and hydrogen that before it was going to go into methane and transform that into acetate, and that will be energy for the cow. The number of cows that we are going to have, we are going to be able to at least understand if we are going to decrease the greenhouse gas emissions, and have a sense also if we are going to increase efficiency, feed efficiency, and milk production.
We've got about 10 minutes left. I do want to give some time to the audience. So if there's any questions out there, if we have the mics around, there's one over here. And then one in the back as well. We have a second mic.
Thank you all very much, and I'd also like to especially thank Brian for allowing us access to Fiscalini and his family to do a whole bunch of breath tests of cows over the last couple of years. So thank you very much for that. It's been hugely appreciated and valued. But my question is one thing that's come up in the last panel and also in this panel is this need for adoption to take place. There needs to be a financial incentive for producers, for the farmers. And I don't see an answer just popping up out of the ether. So my question is, what do you want that to look like? And if you had something that you could take to governments, to industries, to civil society, what would that actually look like? Because if you've got something that you're shopping around, you at least got a draft, you've got something on paper that then can go forward.
I just say that we've been shopping the proposal, and I talked about it a little bit in the presentation. It's pretty straightforward. We're going to stack incentives. We've got two major co-ops here in California, DFA and CDI, who've already got tens of millions of dollars in USDA incentives ready to roll out to aggregate farmers in their co-ops to feed these additives. We're trying to supplement that with another program here at CDFA. And the conversations have already taken place with the Starbucks, the Nestle's, and other customers who are willing to add to that. The goal is simple. You stack those incentives to pay for the product and provide a small financial return to the farmer to incentivize the farmer to use it. So it's pretty straightforward. It's the same process we've been using here in California. Make it convenient and easy for the farmer to understand what the financial payback is. No cost and a small return, and get it implemented. And stacking should do that. We're trying to fill the last piece, which is the state funding. We had it last year. We had $25 million in state budget. I lost 23 of those 25 this year. We're trying to get it back. We're in the budget process right now in Sacramento. I'm working with the budget committee chair, try and get that money back for CDFA. So that's the plan.
I'm going to add to that. The incentive has to be above cost, cover inflation, time value of money, because right now the carbon programs take 12 to 15 months, from what I've been told. And so there's an interest cost on that money, and that's the minimum. And I commend the federal government and the state for catalyzing this economy, but private industry has to step up because those soft dollars will go away at some point. And when they do, if we want this to stand on its own, that has to be there from the industry. Otherwise, it becomes a default tax and it rolls backwards to the producer, and we all know how that ends. It doesn't end well for anybody in the room to have a job, including myself.
Yes, hello. Juan Tricarico from Dairy Management Inc. First, I'd like to thank you for an excellent panel with relevant perspectives from all the members. What I would like to ask is I'd like to get the reaction from the panel members to the following statement. Hello, Juan. I am really confused. We have a feed additive that reduces enteric methane. We want to pilot it. We're going to give it to the farms for free. It has no cost, and yet we can get anybody to try it out. Could you please react to that statement?
What do you have? I mean, sincerely, I've talked to many people in the room about the products they have and what's in the market, and there's a question about what we can do and making sure it's cleared with the regulatory side of life just to get on a dairy. But we need to have a conversation. My group works with probably 80 dairymen now. We've scaled up a little bit in the last couple of years with some partners, and that's just in California. No one's hesitant to trying something. We manage the risks. It was very well said earlier. Define the risks out before we start, and if we hit the risk, we stop. But let's have a conversation.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that is, okay, so there's the product, and it reduces methane. Okay, who's getting credit for that reduction? Who is financially being incentivized? You're giving me the product for free, which is great. Does it have any adverse implications on the dairy cattle from a production, reproduction, animal health standpoint? And I think that's where a lot of producers have been, I'll call it, we've just gotten tired a little bit of, well, why wouldn't you feed this if it has this result? You know how many people have asked me that? Why wouldn't you feed this? It does X, Y, and Z for your cows. And Jed and I have participated in numerous trials where, okay, what happens when it doesn't? then these are my animals, right? This is my livelihood. And that's great that it reduced methane, but what if it reduced my revenue? Then we have a problem.
Any last questions in the room?
So my question is, why wouldn't the incentives come from the Farm Bill? Why are we asking consumers, and say, consumers who have a guilty conscience to stand up and say, I'll pay more for that product when it really benefits everyone?
Well, I think it can come from federal funding. I mean, the funding that's in the RCPP programs currently that USDA has put out to DFA and CDI came from the Inflation Reduction Act, which put more money into these climate smart programs than anything I've seen in past farm bills. So it's coming from the federal government, come from the state government. I don't know that Nestle and Starbucks are convinced that because they're stepping up and paying for some of these reductions, that they're necessarily going to be able to pass that through to their end-use customers either at this point. I think that's part of their hesitation. They're on that front line, not dairy farmers. Most dairy farmers, Brian sells directly to consumers, but most dairy farmers don't. But we're passing that through, and I think Starbucks and Nestle are going to try to raise prices. They don't know if it's going to work.
Thank you, everyone, for the wonderful panel. Dan Reto with the Breakthrough Institute. I was really struck by a slide that Dr. Silva-Del-Rio had showing that something like 40% of producers in Britain had a negative perception of some of these additives. I'm curious if there was something similar in the US, what implications you think those negative perceptions would have on adoption or implementation of these programs?
Brian touched on this a little bit. On my phone right now, I guarantee, at a minimum, there's 500 unread text messages. A lot of them are from salespeople promising a result in a cow. 90% of those results never show up in a cow because of the reality of the variables that affect the cow and the output. In research, we can guess that 50% of peer-reviewed studies cannot be replicated, and that's been studied. In a dairy, I'll bet it's 90 to 95% of the research outcomes can't be found. And so skepticism within farmers and nutritionists is high. I advocate, I'm a pessimistic opportunist because I plan for the worst and hope for the best, and I'm happy either way. And that's what dairymen are too. We've been sold so many ideas over the decades we've been doing this that we start off very skeptical. We got to sell the outcomes to them, and it's got to be productive, profitable, and positive.
And I have seen data on the US. I can't recall where I saw that data, but I know I've seen it. I looked through a lot of data. I think I'm willing to say this, though. Here in California, we've been conditioning this conversation for 20 years. We've seen the writing on the wall. We started Dairy Cares as a collective to work on sustainability issues because we saw it coming before sustainability was even a popular concept. Same with methane. And so we've been talking to farmers about this. They're not going to be at all surprised that we're trying to roll out these programs because we talk about it at every meeting. We talk about when 3NOP is going to be approved, so they know. And I think we're going to have a much better experience here in California than elsewhere. I think part of that is we've got a smaller number of larger dairies as well, which also I think makes it somewhat easier. And we have the outreach through the California Dairy Quality Assurance Program, the extension, and others to support everything we're doing. So we've really built a sustainability effort here in California that's going to pay dividends when it comes to implementation.
Yes, I just want to mention that probably within the United States we are going to have different acceptance of these products. In California, dairy producers are very up to new things, but it doesn't necessarily happen in other areas in the United States. And the dairy producer is going to make sure that he has something in for, is just not using the product and reducing the emissions. And what I'm concerned here is what we are going to use to measure that, because it's different if you verify versus we're reporting versus verification but measurement. I think then the producer is going to be in a different situation, because if just reporting that you are using a product versus verifying that the product that you are using is producing a change. So that is a long shot, like Jed was saying, that sometimes the expected is not what happens.